Welcome to the Progress Texas Happy Hour.
Welcome back to the Progress Texas Happy Hour. I'm Progress Texas Advocacy and Development Coordinator, Tatum Owens. Here at Progress Texas, we amplify progressive values, leaders, and actions. Through our no paywall podcasts and digital media, we reach millions of Texans monthly. And that's made possible by folks like you who invest in independent, progressive media by Texans for Texans. Today, we are recording with several Texans from across the state, from Austin to Houston to San Antonio, to talk about the boom of industrial development pushed by big tech that Texas is set to lead the world in by 2030. That's right, we're talking about data centers, y'all. Data centers in Texas are a major focus in state politics and the public consciousness right now because of a range of concerns that span the state. Whatever your concerns, whether it's about growing AI demand, the power grid being overburdened, maybe you don't want hundreds of diesel generators in your backyard, or don't want to subsidize the richest companies in the world, or crazy, don't want communities with waning water supplies to be wasted. Most of us are watching what happens when it comes to this race to build out big tech infrastructure in Texas, and we're going to talk about that all today. Here to break down the booming boogeyman with us today are several guests. First up, clean energy advocate at Public Citizen is DeeDee Belmares from the Central Texas region near San Antonio. DeeDee, thanks for being here today.
Thanks for having me.
Glad to have you here. And also joining us from TEJAS, but from Spring, Texas, near Houston, is Cain Trevino, staff member at Texas Environmental Justice Advocacy Series, or TEJAS. Thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Glad to have both of these experts and community advocates on the pod today to take time to explain what's going on with our audience. And by the way, later in the episode, we recorded an interview with staff writer at the Austin Chronicle, Sammie, Seamon, to discuss her recent article, How Data Centers Are Eating Up Rural Texas. Hear more from her in a bit. Okay, so starting us off for DeeDee, let's just begin with the easy question, maybe. What is a data center?
Sure. A data center is simply the physical buildings that house IT infrastructure, servers, networking equipment,
Right.
and often most are powering, the internet, generative AI, that type of stuff.
Absolutely. So there's a lot of demand here with increased attention for AI and demand for AI equipment and computing. So data centers have also been around for a while. We're talking today with a good focus on hyperscalers. So these are data centers that can consume 100 megawatts of power, which is equivalent to 80K US homes. However, some examples, especially down here in Texas, have unimaginable needs, with one project consisting of Texas-permitted data centers and gas power plants in Pecos County. Down there, it would use 7.7 gigawatts of capacity. That's equivalent to 7 million homes. So you hear the phrase data center, maybe you have an idea now of what it is. It's a giant warehouse with tons of computer equipment, servers, networking equipment, chips, like DeeDee said. And this hardware powers everything from video streaming to social media. And of course, as we're talking about today, a lot of demand around AI, which demands much more energy and cooling and a lot of other concerns. So lots of rapid build out surrounded around cryptocurrency mining, AI, and cloud storage. Not to mention, these noisy hot warehouses require immense amounts of power to run, water to cool, and land to build on. So if that's the description of a data center, then why Texas? Why has Texas become the second fastest growing market in the nation, second only to Virginia, for development by 2030? And where does that leave us in terms of broad environmental impacts? Cain, would you talk about how this is impacting Texas? And then DeeDee, would you also share?
Sure. Yeah. So as of right now, at least according to the Hark Institute, there are around 400 data centers in Texas, both hyperscaler and non-hyperscalers, as of September of last year. This research is slowly coming out. That's one of the hardest things in the fight against data centers, is that tech companies are very reluctant to share up-to-date data or statistics on their current developments.
Right.
And in Houston, there are at least around 48 data centers as of September of last year. with around 186 megawatts of operating capacity. And for context, 1 megawatt is basically the amount of capacity it would take to supply around 250 Texas homes during the hottest point of the year for at least the whole summer. And so you can imagine with Houston, it just alone, while not even being you could say the hotspot for data center development in Texas, we also have around 585 megawatts of planned additional capacity this year in 2026. So Texas has definitely become the hunting ground, so to speak, for data center developers, both in rural communities, but also in urban communities. And it's mostly because of the lax regulations that Texas officials and the state legislature has allowed data center developers to come and build as they see fit, basically, with very little regulation in the state and many tax incentives as well in local communities, which has been one of the driving factors behind why Texas is tied for the first spot between Texas and Virginia for these developments across the nation.
And DeeDee, joining from the Central Texas region, which is absolutely a hub to Cain's point, would you talk a little bit about what the impact looks like there in terms of the reach and why Texas is that hunting grounds? That's really, I couldn't have put it better myself, Cain.
Right. Cain summed it up really well in terms of Texas is very business friendly, and the regulations, like there aren't any regulations on data centers. Obviously, the availability of land. It's also, at least for San Antonio, the utility rates here are attractive to big businesses, to large load customers. So that's one of the reasons why they are coming here. But that stretch of data centers from Austin all the way down to San Antonio, through San Marcos, through Round Rock, and then now going all the way through Castroville down to Laredo, it is all that availability of land and the welcoming, I guess, of local governments to these data centers. Currently, there's about 25 data centers in San Antonio. It could probably be more. We don't know. For example, the military NSA, the data centers that they have. But in a meeting a couple of months ago with the San Antonio City Council and CPS Energy and San Antonio Water System, CPS Energy has 59 data centers in various stages of development. They say that not all of them will probably come online, but how many do we know will come online? Even if half of them came online, even if half of it or a third of them came online, that is almost, to me, apocalyptic. That would be the equivalent of 26 gigawatts. That is enough to power 6 million homes. That's more than the population of Houston. So you can understand why people in Texas are concerned and why we are concerned in San Antonio. That's just talking about electricity. San Antonio Water System in that same meeting said, data centers really don't use that much water, but we only have enough recycled water for one hyperscaler. And CPS Energy had under contract like 11 data centers. Do the math. It's not sustainable.
Thank you so much for that broad kind of scope view at how many data centers are being built in operations, also proposed down the line as well. And definitely the state has invited big tech to build. I think Greg Abbott said we're the epicenter of AI. He's wanting Texas to be the epicenter of AI. So certainly the lax regulations don't help. And on top of that, you have so many big tech companies behind many of these projects trying to race to build out hyperscale data centers to power and deploy artificial intelligence. That's Amazon, Google, Microsoft, Meta, and so many others. Not to mention private equity, fossil fuel companies, and real estate developers also driving and profiting from this build out. Bringing this to each of your regions, can you break down the impacts a data center might have on the places it's built? That ranges from environmental, economic, community impacts to be named. Cain, would you start talking about Houston?
Sure. So yes, like I was saying, Houston compared to the rest of Texas, such as West Texas, the Dallas metropolitan area, San Antonio. It's not as big of a center for development for data centers themselves. However, Houston is very much at the heart of these developments in both construction and supply. For time-hungry developers, mobile natural gas power generators are, to them, the most efficient option compared to solar or wind because of their capacity in speeding up construction, but also the cost affordability during operations. So one of the myths, right, with data center PR is that a lot of these data centers run on clean energy, when a lot of the times that is not 100% of the case. And a lot of these data centers, while if they do use some form of clean energy, whether that's solar or wind, at least in Texas, a lot of these operations are definitely having liquid natural gas generators in some capacity, whether that's as a backup generator or as a on the clock 24 hours running. So that supply is something that's very understated in these developments across Texas. So the trade-off, for their efficiency is that one of the most neglected parts is that these natural gas generators emit actually more pollution per megawatt than larger power plants. And this is our research according to the Hark Institute. This also comes with most of these data centers still wanting to connect to Texas's ERCOT power grid. So on top of the added pollution, there's still a coupling electric energy demand, which while not exactly an environmental factor, that is still surging the prices for many Texas residents, both local and urban, in their electric bills. But also, again, the air pollution. In Houston, the American Lung Association just rated our city as one of the worst in the nation for ozone pollution and particle pollution in 2026. And so this is coming after a lot of these developments have already taken place since September of 2025. And because a lot of the liquid natural gas refineries are here in Houston, or at least in the greater Houston area, in Pasadena, in Beaumont, in Baytown, we are the main supplier for these big construction operations, but also their ongoing operations. Houston residents that live near these refineries face the brunt of that impact because surge in emission, the surge in production, not to mention the war in Iran driving up production rates as well.
To name exactly what we're talking about, this is emissions from diesel generators being the main power source for so many of these data centers across the state. Diesel emissions right next to, because of a lack of zoning regulations, right next to residential neighborhoods in many, many cases.
Yes, that is really the number one factor for many of residents in Houston, specifically in the East End, having, for example, higher cancer rates than most of the nation because they are, in some cases, living literally right next to refineries, or refineries being right next to their parks or their schools. And these are the same refineries that are, again, supplying the natural gas to these diesel generators for data centers across the state, across the nation. Communities feel this real impact of this AI boom, so to speak, and the environmental consequences of that have been severely understated.
And not to mention, you say a boom. One of the, I would say, understated impacts of data centers is the noise. This is tons of computer servers and equipment making a lot of noise. I mean, I'm sure that y'all can speak to that. DeeDee, you're nodding your head. Would you talk a little bit about noise pollution regarding data centers?
We did a visit of data centers, drove past many of them in San Antonio, and some of them are hard to see. They're kind of blocked by trees and shrubs. What you do see are like the top of the buildings, but there was one data center, Cyrus One, that was just backed up into a neighborhood. There was like a narrow alleyway between the data center and the neighborhood, and all you could hear was wah, 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 wah. I can't imagine my house being backed up into that data center. So along with the noise is also the light pollution that comes from data centers.
They're lit up all night for security purposes. Yeah.
Yes, and I do want to say on the diesel generators, because the data centers do have these as backup power. I don't think residents understand, realize, and nobody's telling them. Like, we don't know how often they run. They are for backup power, but how often do they have to test them? For how long do they test them? Like, is it an hour, 2 hours? We don't know that. And how long would they have to run in some type of emergency situation? That I think is very concerning for people who live near those data centers. And if diesel generation was not enough, now these data centers are building their own gas plant on site near schools, near neighborhoods. Again, I say this is apocalyptic.
Thank you so much for bringing that up. So, and Cain also pointed to this. A lot of the time you would think, oh, it's about computers. We're talking about clean energy, the future, you might think. No, data centers are being used to push a forward engagement of more fossil fuel operations. In fact, you would not expect it. And yet the fossil fuel lobbyists are very good at their jobs. So we've talked a little bit about noise pollution, emissions, but two of the greatest concerns for many of our listeners, we've heard, are water and electricity. So whichever one of you wants to take, let's start with water. And I'll share that a single data center can use as much water as a city of 50K people, which is likely an undercount. As Cain pointed out, a lot of tech companies do not like to keep up with reporting practices. So water.
Sure. We work with communities across the state that are wanting to protect their own community from data center development. San Marcos, for example, I don't know if you've ever been there, but they have a beautiful river. So they naturally want to protect their resource, right? They want to protect the land. They want to protect their water. And that is very scary for people. Some folks in Laredo are starting to get organized because there's a data center there. They love their Rio Grande river and they want to protect it. I think this goes along like with the diesel generators. We hear that some data centers are using the closed loop system, so they don't use as much water, but we don't know which ones are actually using what system for their cooling. And I think we think that the public deserves to know that. Are you a big water user? Are you using recycled water? What is your cooling system besides cooling the infrastructure? These buildings also radiate a lot of heat as well. So I think in this water scarce state, it is really scaring people that we could face a greater shortage, like what has happening in Corpus Christi. Nobody wants to see that, nor should they see that in their own communities.
Absolutely. And to note, hyperscalers usually, y'all can check me on this, but I understand that hyperscalers use so much energy that they're not able to use other cooling methods like through AC or air. Like water is one of the main cooling methods that they can use. And of course, that's what the demand we're seeing for in Texas revolves around. And on top of that, you've pointed to recycled water. I think I can just say this with conviction. The water that goes through most of these data centers is not going to be able to be reused. It is wastewater. Would y'all agree with that as the community advocates and experts? Yeah.
Right. And I'd like to say something to San Antonio is if the data centers cannot get the water that they need for their operations through our utility, they can go to the Edwards Aquifer Authority and get water there. And that, like, the competition for multiple pressures. Also, again, like the Edwards Aquifer is fragile. Like, we should protect our aquifers. And we don't need all these hyperscalers to power your phone. Right? Like, that is a big misconception that we're hearing from big tech industry. If you want to use your phone, you need this data center. And that is just categorically false.
Thank you, DeeDee, for some of that expertise around water. Cain, would you talk about electricity before we move on beyond just the impacts of data centers?
Yes, and just to circle back a little bit on the impact specifically on rural communities in Texas, which are seeing a disproportionate run of the impact of data center development, as we were mentioning, noise pollution, but also since a lot of rural communities in Texas are agricultural and rely on farmland, over, at least as of April 2025 of last year, over 80% of the state of Texas was experiencing a drought. and 17% experiencing exceptional drought. The data center demand, since it has exploded from last April, it's only you can only imagine the strain it has put on not only the Texas ecosystem for these agriculture dependent communities, but not to mention the impact on wildlife, but also on their economies themselves, but also on their environment. And so in terms of electricity, for these already economically strained communities that are already feeling the brunt of the impact because of how the water shortage has affected them. There's Corpus Christi, of course, but there's also many places across the state of Texas and West Texas in the Panhandle that are experiencing drought as well. The impact of the surge in electricity prices is another very big factor in their the drop in quality of life. And the main reason for that, as we're going back to talk about lax regulations, is because of the way the ERCOT grid works in Texas. Specifically, it's seen as the one spot in the U.S. This is a quote from a data center official. The ERCOT grid in Texas is seen as the one spot in the U.S. that can deliver such an amount of power to supply this ongoing boom. So it's rivaling, Virginia, but it's also because the amount of time data centers usually have to apply to connect themselves to the ERCOT power grid. The time for Virginia is around 5 years, 5 to 7 years, but to connect themselves to ERCOT is only around 3. So the level of loose regulations here is very understated, and it's the main reason why a lot of Texas communities are facing such severe consequences, because state officials are allowing these companies to loot and plunder, basically, for the natural resources, for the land, and they're basically given free roam to do so. And so electricity is a big part of that, when talking about just your electricity bill. But there's also the noise pollution. There's the light pollution. There's the surge in, again, computing power, which in a lot of cases also requires extra generation from these diesel generators. So again, this is not clean energy operation. We're not just talking electricity with no emissions. These still have severe pollution consequences, environmental consequences.
Right. So I think boiled down, or summing it all up, they're noisy, they're wasting water on an already strained water supply, and they're using energy in a state that we know has a grid that has failed because we continue to not connect to the national grid. So we're alone in it. And on top of that, I think there was news this week, if I remember correctly, that Texas has the highest rates nationally. There's 50 states, we're last in utility shutoffs. And we know that these data centers are going to have an extreme burden on the grid, which is already overburdened. So, DeeDee, please share. It sounds like you have some thoughts there.
That is, everybody has a right to clean power and clean water. And we live in a state with like astronomical shutoffs. In San Antonio at CPS Energy, over 10% of their customers are struggling to pay their bills, right? It's wrong that somebody who works really hard and struggles to keep their power on, get their power shut off, but a data center, it pretty much roll out the red carpet, let them use whatever they want, because it is not a need. We cannot say data centers need this power, they need this water, they want that. And that is terribly wrong and unfair in this state.
Definitely. And actually, to that point, as we're rounding out towards the end of this episode, I'd love if y'all could share about what each of your organizations are doing around data centers specific to your region, and maybe share a victory for community advocates.
Sure. Yeah. We support we support the folks in different communities, all the way from Dallas all the way down to starting with, we're starting up in Laredo, just giving them some support and tools that people need to stop these data centers from being built in their communities. I'm going to talk about one win that would be San Marcos, those folks there are so well organized, and it is a strong community approach to city council meetings where there were discussions and a vote on a zoning designation change from residential to commercial in order for this data center to be built. The city council voted to keep the zoning designation so that the data center temporarily. I mean, there's things that could possibly change, but that was because the community came out. So over 300 people that night came to a lot of them. Probably at least 150 signed up to speak. Others were outside of the building. They had a big stereo out there so people could listen. They had food. They had activities for children. People were honking as they went by. That is a win, and they don't come often, but it just shows that community power can stop this development.
Thank you, DeeDee. Yeah, Public Citizen has done work in Brazoria back in March, attended the Texas House Committee on State Affairs hearing on data centers, warning of so many of the concerns we've listed today, and work in Round Rock and San Marcos around residential areas, as we've just said. Hood County with a moratorium, which is an interesting piece of this puzzle in terms of solutions we can put forward and enact. And of course, around San Antonio and energy use with the notorious CPS. So Cain, would you talk about Houston and TEJAS? What are y'all up to?
Yes. So right now, TEJAS, or Texas Environmental Justice Advocacy Services, as an environmental justice organization, we see our role in the data center fight in Texas as trying to connect the developments of data centers across the state to the oil and gas industry here in Houston, specifically in the East End and in along the Ship Channel, greater Houston area. That's been sort of our goal, trying to, specifically through these pipelines that we've seen of liquid natural gas supply to West Texas, to the Dallas metropolitan area, to San Antonio. We've been trying to get the lay of the land and see how these networks of development are fueled by the industry here in Houston, and what we can do to stop that by working with communities across Texas. So I'll say one of the victories, to me at least, was actually having the opportunity to build community with DeeDee Belmares in San Antonio recently, with a lot of local organizers that were working against data center developers in San Antonio and trying to figure out how to advocate for their own communities, not only there, but also here in Houston, where we're actively trying to build more mobilization against these developments in our own county. And I'll say one of the, in terms of a call to action, one of the best things that people can do, and it's one of the ways that actually the people in Brazoria County were able to at least attempt to stop the $1 billion AI project that was about to take place, was the push on local officials to remove or reduce all tax abatements for data center developers, or any form of tax incentive, as that's one of the driving reasons behind why Texas has become such a hotspot for developers, is these large tax incentives, but also lax regulations. And while regulations take longer, local governments, municipalities can remove these abatements a lot easier.
Policies around, one, AI, but data centers in general have been few and far between because it is a new and booming industry. But some policies have been put into place, like you said, like the state sales tax exemption for qualified data centers, which of course is something that we would want to rein in. But also Senate Bill 6 was put forward and enacted, which allows grid operators to order data centers to cut their electricity use or switch to backup power when supplies are short. So
it's still in SB 6 is still in rulemaking at the moment.
I think just to end off on a call to action, I'm sure DeeDee can also chime in on this, but the data center fight in Texas is very much a permit fight. It's trying to see how you can slow it, maybe not necessarily how you can stop it, but how you can create as much noise as possible that will really frustrate them enough to back off. And Brazoria County was one large example of that, where they fought their local officials, they pushed their local officials to remove the tax abatement for the data center development. While it didn't necessarily stop it, it definitely caused a riot. And that's not nothing. For a lot of communities, the larger the mobilization, the larger the possibility, really, of stopping data centers in your community. It just takes organization, and it just takes an understanding of the weaknesses of these developers, which a big part of that is the tax incentive.
Cain and DeeDee, do y'all have any other final thoughts? And how can people get involved, both with the fight against data centers and with your organizations?
Sure. So Public Citizen, along with Climate Justice Alliance and the Texas Youth Power Alliance, and with a lot of support from Media Justice, we started the Texas Data Center Rebellion Coalition. Came to San Antonio. We had a convening of close to 80 people from all over the state. We're on Instagram right now, but that's one way to stay connected to what's happening throughout Texas. And we're constantly highlighting the different coalitions and groups of folks from different cities, towns, rural areas that are in the fight.
Like I said, TEJAS, Texas Environmental Justice Advocacy Services, we're always looking to build more community in the East End, but also in the greater Houston area, with all of our frontline communities that are experiencing the consequences of the AI boom and the pollution in these cities. We're always looking for more volunteers, more members on our website, tejasbarrios.org. However, whatever concerns you have, we're always trying to keep our ear on the ground with our community and see what is happening in their nearby refineries or in their nearby communities. We're always trying to see what's next. So yes, tejasbarrios.org. We're always looking to continue building across Texas.
That's the movement, isn't it? So thank you both for joining us. So very much value your expertise and your work, trying to protect our communities, trying to protect water in Texas, our land, our air, all of the above, and maybe our ears as well. DeeDee, Belmares, Cain Trevino, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you.
Thank you, DeeDee Belmares, Clean Energy Advocate at Public Citizen, and staff member Cain Trevino at Texas Environmental Justice Advocacy Series, or TEJAS. Now we will hear from our other guest today, Sammie Seamon at the Austin Chronicle, to hear about her recent article, also relevant to this ongoing battle. All right, folks. So coming off of that conversation with environmental and community advocates, with Public Citizen and TEJAS, we now welcome Sammie Seamon, a staff writer at the Austin Chronicle, to discuss her recent article, How Data Centers Are Eating Up Rural Texas. So we just heard from Public Citizen and TEJAS discussing what a data center is, defining hyperscalers, talking about why Texas has been targeted for market growth, about environmental, economic, and community impacts the center has on the area around its operations, plus discussion on victories and how folks can get involved. So a lot, also specific to the San Antonio and Houston regions. So from you, to start us off, we'd like to hear a more broad overview of Texas and how those concerns are relevant to Austin as well, since that's where you're joining from. You are a journalist who's been following the massive growth surrounding this boom in our state. Tell us the story.
Hi, Tatum. Well, thanks so much for having me on. Yeah, I mean, we're seeing over 140 data centers come to the state, according to a well-cited data center tracker, CleanView, in an attempt to keep pace with AI's demand for data storage. Texas is on track to overtake some of the world's largest data center market regions, the current one being Northern Virginia by 2030. Advocates are looking at over 30 data centers being planned in Austin area counties. That's covering Burnett, Hayes, Williamson, Travis, Caldwell. And so for this story in particular, we took a look at Caldwell County and 4 data centers that are being planned or are already in development there. But yeah, I mean, one question people often have is, why Texas? Data center operators are looking for, wide open tracts of land. These data centers can be hundreds to even thousands of acres. And so they're looking for a lot of land. And as we saw in Caldwell County, landowners that are willing to sell We've gotten some messages from readers that they're saying, yes, like I know, large ranches in my area are being sold to data center operators. They're also looking for access to energy and water. And, right now they can request to plug into the state grid, ERCOT, and they've been raising some concerns about the demand on that. And they're looking for water access as well, because these data centers can be very water thirsty and need local resources.
Something we talked about earlier with our other guests was the public consciousness's focus on data centers because of our water crisis across the state, whether you're in Corpus Christi, which is, of course, facing a historic drought, potentially becoming or on track to become the first modern city to become without water. So major concerns at hand. And thank you for sharing about why Texas is kind of at the center of this. Would you share a little bit more about that why question regarding our state's policies towards it and tax exemptions, really, that piece of this puzzle?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the Texas Tribune reported this first in early April that the state will grant data center operators $1.3 billion in tax exemptions in 2026 and ultimately lose up to $3.2 billion over the next 2 years, according to stats from the comptroller's office. And these are sales tax exemptions that go way back for data centers, but we still have them. And I think now state lawmakers are taking another look at, wow, we're going to be losing a ballooning amount of money to data center operators if we continue to grant them these exemptions.
Absolutely. And also regarding the why of Texas, we've talked about the lax regulations regarding zoning. I think that brings us to, if that's the why, the where of these data centers. Would you talk about your findings regarding where in Texas these are being built and the commonalities in these regions?
Yeah, research has come out that data centers are being disproportionately built in the South, in arid regions, in often, regions that are already facing severe drought conditions like we are in Central Texas. I mean, I've been talking to folks at the Barton Springs Edwards Aquifer Groundwater Conservation District, and they've declared, stage 3 drought. And yeah, we're looking at, increasingly severe drought conditions as well with climate change. So it's definitely a concern that these data centers are coming disproportionately to these areas. They're also getting built, disproportionately next to, socially disadvantaged or, communities or historically Black and Brown communities. And so advocates are bringing attention to that. And that's a real concern for those communities and in terms of the effects that these can have on health and water quality and soil quality and the different types of ways that they can pollute the environment.
Yeah. Our guest, Cain Trevino from TEJAS, pointed to some of the similarities in this type of industrial build-out as compared to oil and gas build-out in Texas, especially with us leading the markets in both. It's very interesting to see the commonalities there with emissions, diesel emissions being a major concern for these data centers, but also for because of lax regulations and especially regarding zoning for residential build out. You can see that it's communities that can't afford to stand up for themselves, historically and socioeconomically disadvantaged communities that are being built next to. We also discussed with the Cain and DeeDee about noise pollution just being one of the many different pieces of this puzzle. So we talked about why, where. Would you talk about what communities are concerned about? And I'd love if you would also dive into two of the specific examples you paint a larger picture of in your article in rural Texas.
I think a lot of the focus was on San Marcos earlier this year with their data center fight. And they did manage to stop a development from coming to their community. But now Caldwell County residents are really concerned about what's happening in their own community with these 4 data centers that have already been approved or are being proposed in their community. because they know the health risks and polluting risks that these can carry. And people are also really concerned about the impacts that data centers can have on farming. And, that's really important to a lot of rural communities and farming communities in Texas.
Climate Power actually released some new polling with Blue Rose Research that says that voters are deeply concerned about the impact of data centers on increased utility costs and energy consumption, all the things we've described today. But people that were surveyed were asked to select the more concerning issue and randomized head-to-head matchups against various data-centered related issues, all the things we talked about. Utility costs were selected 64% of the time, and energy consumption was selected 59% of the time. Overall, you saw that the majority of Americans are very concerned, and for the different reasons listed there, I would point listeners to go check out that research. But for people who marked that they were in opposition to data centers, they also said that they support data centers powered by clean energy by a 25-point margin and oppose those powered by fossil fuels by a 16-point margin. I bring this up and we'll talk a little bit more about some of the mythologizing that's happening around renewable energy when it comes to data centers. But as for how land is being impacted, would you talk a little bit further on how Texas farmers are being impacted by this build out?
Yeah, I spoke to Clayton Tucker, who's Secretary of the Texas Farmers Union. He's now running for Commissioner of Agriculture in Texas. And he was really pointing to, the fact that growing up in a farming community, they were already experiencing the effects of drought and of water scarcity. And we're already concerned about the future of water for agricultural use in their communities. And now data centers pose an additional potential threat to that, in addition to the drought that we've already been experiencing. So, he emphasized that data centers can affect the quality of the soil and local water sources for farming. That where they built a lot of these things, wells ran dry. He said the ones that didn't became toxic with nitrates, with heavy metals. And how that can potentially even diminish food nutrition itself. And we all benefit from Texas agriculture. We all go to the grocery store. This would affect all of us, really, and food sources that the entire nation depends on. So I think that is a cause for concern. We live in Texas, which is already really hot, and there's been preliminary research as well that data centers have a heat island effect. Surface temperatures near existing data centers increased by an average of 3.6 to as high as 16.4 degrees, raising temperatures up to 6 miles away. And, heat is already a major cause of death for cattle, which is a huge, agricultural farming industry here in Texas. So taking all of these risks, the Texas Farmers Union has called for a moratorium on data center development across the state, despite, I think, perhaps political enthusiasm in the state to be pro-business and to welcome these industries in, to bring revenue and jobs and whatever those reasons may be. Nevertheless, the Texas Farmers Union is calling for a check on these until the state can better regulate how they will use local resources, mostly water. And that's a huge concern for those communities.
Definitely. And that actually leads me into the first question of just a little game that we have for our listeners today, and for you, Sammie, as you'll be taking part in it. We wanted to do some myth busting around data centers. So I'll just start us off with actually a point that you just kind of referred to, which is here's and this is from the Site Fight Guide, which we will link in the show notes for any people who want to see a broad view of national resources around data centers. But here is a myth that they share. Myth: data centers will create thousands of well-paid jobs. Sammie, would you say this is true or false? And give your guess as to why.
Yeah, that argument was made by data center operators to lawmakers in early April.
Mm-hmm.
But as some advocates have pointed to, that is not always true. Advocates often say that they bring in initial construction jobs and temporary work. But after that, the local community does see few permanent jobs. there might be roles for technicians or security or groundskeeping positions, but not many people are actually employed inside of these data centers, though some are, and though there is an argument to be made that they do create more jobs. Whether those are local jobs, whether those are jobs that are actually benefiting the local community is something that's brought up.
To our next myth, and just to give whatever their answer may be, it falls more in line with what Sammie has just stated, which is to point out the concerns around many of the jobs surrounding data centers being temporary and going to out-of-state workers, mostly focusing on construction, no long-term development and also economic growth to be made for that specific focus of data centers. So here is another myth. We've already talked about this a little bit. Would love to hear more from you around this. So myth, tax incentives help us get corporations to come to the area, and then we benefit from the tax revenue that they bring. Do you think that is true or false for Texas data centers?
Another thing that operators argue is true a lot of the time. I think just when the numbers are so high and the state is like, wow, we're going to lose out on over $3 billion in 2 years, where could that money go otherwise? And, the largest data center tenants in Texas are companies like Oracle, Microsoft, Amazon.
And their shell companies as well, to be clear. Like, even if you don't see these big tech company names on a project that is in operations or proposed, that does not mean that they are involved in, and please continue. Yeah.
Well, yeah, I think something that people often don't understand too is that a lot of these data centers are almost like apartments, and they're empty, and they're looking for Microsoft, Amazon, Meta to come in and be a tenant to them to actually use the space. So yeah, I mean, just because a data center doesn't have a tech name, on the front of it doesn't necessarily mean that they're not there. When the state is losing that amount of money, I think a lot of people are questioning whether that money could potentially go to better uses, and the fact that these large tech companies that, are frankly owned by billionaires might not meet those tax exemptions and might still come to the state anyway.
Yeah, actually, a Georgia audit found that 70% of data projects would have been located in the state even without subsidies. So it really is just shown from other states' examples. You can see that is a loss that Texas taxpayers really need. But whether your top issue is our defunded education system or the water crisis, which even in the last legislative session, we saw so much energy and legislation put forward targeting that. Okay, thank you for that, Sammie. And we're going to be rounding out with maybe 2 more of these. Here is your next myth. Water. It's kind of laughable. This is coming from a national concern, so maybe some states do not have water on their minds like so many of us here in Texas do. Myth, water concerns are overblown. Certainly not for Texas. Data centers are becoming more efficient, and some are even water positive. Would you speak to that and cooling methods too?
Yeah, I mean, for the article, I spoke to the folks at the Houston Advanced Research Center and Margaret Cook, who's been looking into this specifically, and they published a white paper about this a few months ago. Cook says that it is possible for data centers to be less water thirsty, but that really depends on what kind of cooling systems they use. These data centers use a lot of water to cool these constantly heating server racks that are always heating, and they will always need to be cooled. And so what a lot of data centers are using now are what's called closed loop systems, where the same water, ideally is cycled in a loop to cool the server racks. But, not all closed loop systems are made equal. And Cook emphasized that even though a data center might have a closed loop system, they still might be losing water to evaporation. They still might be using some kind of water-powered chiller to cool the water to remove the heat out of the closed loop. Some data centers use AC to remove heat out of the closed loop. But as she mentioned in the article as well, energy is still often more expensive than water. And so that's why data centers tend to still lean on water. But it is true that a lot of data centers are investing in these technologies because they know residents are concerned about water use, and they also want a sustainable model. They also don't want to run out of water in the case that things get much worse in the coming decades. So yeah, I mean, it's in everyone's interest that they become more sustainable. It's a matter of whether that is regulated by the state, whether those operators are willing to invest in those technologies that use less water.
Yeah, and before we move to our last myth busting segment question for you, I'm just going to highlight something that we shared in our earlier part of this episode, which is that absolutely AC is used for some, but when we're talking about hyperscalers in Texas and the build out to meet AI demand, direct liquid cooling and closed loop cooling are what we're talking about in those circumstances, because air alone is not enough to cool these extremely hot racks and computer equipment. So thank you for that. You also pointed to the energy around data centers. So the last myth that we have for you today is we can just power all the data centers with renewable energy. Would you talk about how renewable energy fits into this conversation, if it's being used, and if proponents for building data centers are all for renewable or maybe not?
Yeah, that's a topic that I don't know as much about. I do know that a lot of data centers are building their own mini grids, basically mini utilities to power their data centers. And some of those power plants are powered by renewable energy. People are working on solar and other ways to generate electricity for these data centers that need so much electricity to run. But nonetheless, I think the concern is that when so many are asking to plug into the state grid that we all use, that is run by ERCOT, they're projecting that peak demand on the grid could climb to 367,000 megawatts by 2032, when the current demand is around 85,000. So you can imagine how much higher that is.
Quadruple.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Pablo Vegas, the CEO of ERCOT, told legislators earlier this month that they're receiving dozens of requests from new projects to connect to the grid every month, with about 87 of those coming from data centers.
Wow. Oh, thank you so much for sharing that extra context there. And it'll be very interesting to see. So to this point, from our context and from this very helpful resource, which I push our listeners to read in the show notes, it has shown that, yes, renewable energy, as we live in Texas, is a major source of power for so many of us, for our grid, is used. And at the same time, we've seen a push. I would say also fossil fuel developers are helping fund a lot of data center development here in Texas. So it would make sense then to know also that proposed plans for data centers to be built has also been linked to excuses to build more fossil fuel infrastructure. Very interesting to see what that will look like. And certainly, but both water and data centers will be a major focus for the upcoming legislative session in talking about our policymaking regarding these issues. So we'll see what that turns out to be. And that is the end of our little myth-busting game. As we round out this episode, I'd love to leave our listeners on a happy note and then talk a little bit about the Austin Chron in a moment as well. Would you talk about some of the community-led wins that you've seen and also reported on?
Yeah, I mean, the situation that happened in Uland, I think, is a good example of that. Uland is a 2,000 person, pretty small rural town, just 30 miles from Austin, so closer to Austin than Lockhart is. And they had an open house with a data center operator called Powerhouse. And the next day, the Uland City Council was set to vote on a rezoning request for that project. And ultimately, the data center pulled out. It was a no-show, and city council members ended up not voting on that situation or that proposal to rezone at all. So now it's possible that they will approach the county with that proposal soon, as they've indicated. It's very cool to see that communities are concerned about the industry that's coming to their communities and the impact it can have, and that they are organizing and coming together and showing up to county commissioners meetings and their local city council meetings and urging their local elected representatives to honor, what the community wants, really. And it's been making a difference in terms of whether these projects are approved or not.
Thank you so much for that. And on the terms of what a community wants, I know that my community, the community of one, and that is Tatum Owens, is is local, independent, free journalism. Let's talk a little bit about your team, where you're joining from, which is the Austin Chronicle. Here is my show and tell moment. I have many, many copies featuring Sammie Seamon's articles, as well as, all the other fantastic writers on the Austin Chronicle team. So very happy to, for one thing, have the literal physical copy of this article, which we will also link in the show notes, which is Sammie's article. And let's talk a little bit about this time of increased censorship that we're all experiencing. Before I pitch it back to you, I think that it's interesting to see this connection between data centers and independent journalism. I'll go into that saying some of the build out that's been pushed by none other than multinational corporations pushing these deals who get tax exemptions to make your air, water, and community worse are the same corporations who undermine small businesses and local news. Very interesting connection here and an opportunity to discuss the Austin Chronicle. Some of the releases that y'all have put out have included what is available on your web store, I believe, whether in the paper it being a page or on your website it being a t-shirt featuring the slogan, "Fuck social media, marry free press, and kill AI." Made me laugh, makes me laugh every time I read it. Would you talk a little bit about that? And then I'll give the description on the website, because I think that's also fun.
Yeah, I know that came out, I forget, like a few months ago. But yeah, I mean, as a newsroom, also, I think AI has been making its way into the journalistic sphere for a while now. But I think a lot of, especially local publications like the Austin Chronicle, like a lot of our trusted local news sources here in Austin and Texas, are really saying no to that. We don't use AI to write, to report, period. And that's a value that we hold and a lot of other newsrooms hold. So that's one thing in terms of that slogan. But yeah, I mean, so the Austin Chronicle is an alt weekly, comes out every Thursday on hundreds of stands all over the Austin area. So they're free to pick up and find local reporting inside.
Yeah, and we'll put that link to support the Austin Chronicle in the show notes as well, because it's free to pick up, and also it is, like all journalism, paid by someone. So that can be you, dear listener. And just to give that description, like we mentioned in the just before, the description for this t-shirt is, it follows as such. Tired of endless scrolls, echo chambers, and bots dictating your reality? Flip the script with our bold slogan, "Fuck social media, marry free press, and kill AI" merch collection, a savage call out to reclaim truth in a digital dystopia. They're very attractive to me. So thank you so much, Sammie, for talking a little bit about the Austin Chronicle and, of course, this full conversation today. Would you share with our listeners how they can follow along with your writing and any other writing from the Austin Chronicle?
Yeah, for sure. Again, just picking up our issues every Thursday on stands. We're also online, www.austinchronicle.com. You can find my own author page and that of my brilliant colleagues, where we have all of our reporting. I think that's it.
Well, that'll do it. Then thank you for joining us today, Sammie Seamon at the Austin Chronicle, staff writer at the Austin Chronicle. Glad to have you here.
Meet me, Tatum.
Of course. So definitely an ongoing story, and glad to have all of our guests on the pod today to start out this conversation from our reporting. And with water woes being a growing concern and data centers as well, expect more from our pod network covering this issue. For the past 16 years, Progress Texas has amplified progressive values, leaders, and actions. Progress Texas's digital and podcast networks reach millions with smart, hard-hitting coverage that stands out from all the clutter online. Through our no-paywall podcasts and digital media, we make Texas politics easy to understand and participate in, providing direct access to county, statewide, and federal candidates across the state. When lies in Texas are well-funded by the far right, our fact-based reporting hands the mic to voiceless Texans. Please support our peerless work and share this episode with a friend. Thanks for listening, and catch you on the next episode.